Right in the middle of World War One, Great Britain had to deal with a battle at home. The last time we visited this country of Ireland, just off England's western coast, the people of Ireland were fretting under British rule. Ireland had been part of the British Empire for more than 300 years. For the last 100 years, Ireland had to send its representatives to the British Parliament and had no government of its own. The Irish had suffered from famine, and the English had done little to help. And when the Prime Minister William Gladstone had tried to convince the Parliament to pass the Home Rule Bill that would give the Irish the freedom to govern themselves, the Parliament refused. Gladstone had long been convinced that the way the English treated the Irish was not only wrong but also stupid. The worse the English treated the Irish, the more the Irish would hate the English. He called the English rule of Ireland 7 centuries of misgovernment, and warned the English that this misgovernment was bound to bring trouble. A cloud in the west, the coming storm. The Irish would remember being forced to pay rent to absentee landlords and being forced into obedience to the laws those landlords had made to the end of time. William Gladstone's fiery speeches did convince Parliament to pass laws that gave Irish parents the right to buy back some of the land they had lost to the greedy English landlords. Parliament hoped that this would help to make Ireland a little bit more peaceful. William Gladstone also helped to pass a law that would give Protestants and Catholics equal rights in Ireland. Meanwhile, the people of Ireland were beginning more and more to speak of themselves as Irish rather than British. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats wrote poems that celebrated the Irish ideas and Irish words. The Gaelic League was founded. Its members hoped that Irish would be able to abandon speaking English in favor of the ancient Irish language called Gaelic. An organization called the Gaelic Athletic Association taught Irish boys to play ancient Irish games like hurling. Resistance groups like those that had grown up in countries all over the world had formed. The group Young Ireland wanted to work towards freedom from England by changing the laws of Great Britain. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, also called the Fenians, wanted to fight for freedom, and the Irish Land League organized poor tenants against their landlords. The Land League taught poor Irish men and women that they could resist the English by refusing to work for the English employers and by not buying from English merchants. One of the English landlords who found that his Irish employers were no longer willing to work for him or buy from him was named Charles Boycott. From then on, this form of resistance was known as the boycott. We call it striking now. But the most powerful of these resistance groups was organized in 1905. It was called Sinn Féin, which is Gaelic for us alone. Sinn Féin wanted Ireland to remain under the British Crown, but to get its own parliament and its own self-rule back again. Ireland would be separate, independent country, but it would be loyal to the English monarch just like Canada. Many Catholics in Ireland liked Sinn Féin's ideas, but Protestants in north of Ireland were afraid of what might happen if Ireland, which still had more Catholics than Protestants in it, got self-governed back again. Under the British rule, Protestants and Catholics were equal, but if Irish self-rule were restored, Catholics would be in the majority. What if the Catholics then turned around and treated the Protestants badly? Most of the Protestants who didn't want Ireland to have home rule lived in the north of Ireland, in 6 counties called Ulster. Ulster was very different from the rest of the country because Scottish Presbyterians had settled there many years ago. Many Ulster Irish were Presbyterians. The rest of Ireland was filled with farms, but Ulster was filled with factories and shipbuilding companies. Almost 500,000 people in Northern Ireland, most of them Presbyterians, joined together to sign a document called the Ulster Covenant. It read, "We are convinced in our conscience that home rule would be disastrous, that it would destroy our civil and religious freedom, our citizenship, and the unity of the empire. We will use all means which may be found necessary to defeat the present conspiracy to set up a home rule parliament in Ireland." All means necessary meant that if the British government gave Ireland home rule, the Northern Irish Protestants would fight back. A secret army called the Ulster Volunteer Force formed. It had 100,000 soldiers in it. The Ulster Volunteer Force was well armed because it bought hundreds of guns and many tons of ammunition from Germany. Germany was happy to do anything that would cause the British trouble at home and distract them from the war. Because remember, during this time the war hasn't ended yet, eh? Now, there were 2 different sides in Ireland, one threatening to fight if Ireland wasn't giving home rule, and the other threatening to fight if it was. Violence was inevitable, and it erupted in April 24, 1916, the Monday right after Easter Sunday, the Easter Rebellion. A Fenian leader named Patrick Henry Pearse led about 1,000 Irish rebels in taking control of the post office in the Irish city of Dublin. These rebels, who were fighting for home rule, also took control of government buildings. British troops marched in to put the rebellion down. After a week of fighting in the streets, the rebels were captured. This short revolt caused dreadful problems for the Great Britain. Almost 400 people had died, and half of those had been innocent people shot by accident during the gun battles. Also, people that was part of the rebellion were shot. This made both the Irish and many English angry. More Irish than ever now wanted independence. Sinn Féin, the rebel organisation, gained even more followers. The Irish poet William Butler Yeats wrote one of his most famous poems about the Easter Uprising, called Easter 1916. "Too long a sacrifice," he wrote, "can make a stone of the heart." Now the poem concludes, the times are changed utterly. Ireland and England could never go back to their old relationship. They would always be enemies. Almost 3 years after the Easter Uprising, Sinn Féin set up its own government in Ireland, calling it the Dáil Éireann, or the Irish Assembly. The Dáil Éireann announced that Ireland would now govern itself, no matter what the British thought. In order to protect their new government, a Sinn Féin leader named Michael Collins organized his own army, the Irish Republican Army. At once, Great Britain sent over soldiers to defeat the Irish Republican Army, or the IRA. Fighting raged over the island. Houses were burned, innocent people were killed. More and more British began to think that Ireland should simply be allowed to govern itself. In the United States, where so many Irish now lived, plenty of Irish Americans agreed with the Fenian movement and began to call for home rule too. When World War I ended, Great Britain and Sinn Féin began to talk about their independence. Months and months later, in 1921, Sinn Féin and the British government signed a treaty. This treaty would make most of Ireland into a country called the Irish Free State. Like Canada, the Irish Free State would still be loyal to the British monarch, but it would rule itself, have its own parliament and make its own laws. William Butler Yeats was invited to become a member of the brand new Irish Parliament. But Ulster, the six counties in the north of Ireland where so many Protestants lived, would not be part of the Irish Free State. Ulster would remain part of Great Britain. Not everyone in Ireland was happy with this treaty. Some of the Irish objected to losing Ulster. Others wanted Ireland to be completely independent without any formal allegiance to Great Britain. Michael Collins himself was assassinated by Irish rebels who believed that Collins had betrayed Ireland by agreeing to be loyal to the British monarch. Sinn Féin itself didn't like the idea of Ulster remaining part of Great Britain, but the treaty seemed to be the only way to end the fighting between the two countries. By 1923, the Irish Free State was governing itself. 14 years later, Great Britain would agree to allow the Irish Free State to become a completely independent country called Eire, or the Republic of Ireland. But Ulster, or Northern Ireland, remained part of the British Empire, an unhappy and trouble-filled part where Catholics were too often harassed, robbed, and even beaten by their neighbors. Ironic, they were scared that the Catholics would treat them bad, and now look what they're doing. It's not good. So, let's review. The movement for Home Rule would give Ireland the right to have its own parliament and its own self-rule. Most powerful resistance group fighting for Home Rule was the Sinn Féin. A rebellion for Home Rule on the Friday after Easter, 1916, was the Easter Rebellion, and the fighting angered both the Irish and the English. And in 1921, Ireland became the Irish Free State. And then there was the movement against Home Rule. The six northern countries were mostly Protestants. The Ulster government promised that they would fight the Home Rule, and in 1916 Ulster remained part of Great Britain. And then Ulster is also called Northern Ireland.
That's off! I shouldn't have had those artichoke poppers.